She thought she'd finally found peace. After years of heartbreak, a kind man, a second chance, a love that made her believe again. But what Emily didn't know was that the man she married wasn't who he said he was. Within a year, her dream life would unravel one secret. One midnight phone call at a time. This is a story about love, betrayal, and how a quiet woman from Ohio discovered the truth that nearly destroyed her. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains, soft and golden against the quiet kitchen. Emily sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. The house was still except for the faint shuffle of her teenage son, Jonah, upstairs getting ready for school. Outside, Columbus was gray with early rain. The streets looked tired, the air heavy with that damp chill that always seemed to find its way into old houses. It should have been an ordinary Thursday, but Emily couldn't shake the weight in her chest. It had been 2 years since her divorce, yet the silence that followed still hadn't softened. She filled her days with work, errands, and caring for Jonah. She smiled when people expected her to, laughed when it felt polite, but underneath it all, there was a quiet ache. She had told herself she didn't need anyone, that she was fine on her own. But fine had slowly turned into empty. Later that morning, she stopped by a small coffee shop on her way to work. The smell of cinnamon and roasted beans greeted her like a familiar hug. She came here every morning, a small escape before facing another day behind a desk. She ordered her usual, a flat white with extra foam, and as she turned to leave, a man's voice stopped her. "Hey, you dropped this." She turned. A man stood behind her, holding out the pen she'd just used to sign her receipt. He was tall, early 40s maybe, with a kind smile and a charcoal jacket that looked a little too expensive for the neighborhood. "Oh, thank you," she said, taking the pen, her cheeks warm with surprise. "No problem," he said, smiling easily. "I'm David, Emily. That's a beautiful name," he said, genuine, not slick. "You come here often?" She laughed softly. "Every morning. It's part of the routine. Then I guess I'll have to start coming more often." Something in his tone made her smile in spite of herself. That evening, while washing dishes, Emily found herself replaying that short exchange. The way he'd smiled, the quiet warmth in his voice. It had been so long since someone had spoken to her like that, without pity, without agenda, just interest. The next morning, he was there again. Same jacket, same soft smile, holding a folded newspaper instead of a phone. "You again," she teased. "Couldn't resist the coffee," he said, grinning. By the third morning, he joined her at her table. They talked easily about the weather, about work, about everything and nothing. David told her he was an architect working on a downtown restoration project. She told him about her job and marketing, about Jonah, and about how she'd learned to fix the sink herself last weekend. He listened closely, the kind of listening that made her feel seen. And slowly, their mornings stretched longer. A few weeks later, on a rainy Friday, he walked her to her car. The world smelled of wet leaves and asphalt. "You ever get tired of being brave all the time?" he asked suddenly. She paused, startled by the question. "What do you mean?" "I can tell," he said gently. "You hold everything together. You take care of everyone. That's brave, but it's got to get lonely." She looked at him for a long moment. "Yeah," she said quietly. "It does," he smiled. "Then let me take you to dinner." "No brave faces required," she said. Yes. Their first date was at a small Italian place tucked between brick buildings on High Street. The lights were low. The air smelled of garlic and wine, and for once, she didn't feel like she was pretending to be okay. He talked about growing up in Chicago, about the way he loved old buildings because they had stories hidden in their walls. "Maybe people are like that too," she said. He tilted his head. How so? Some of us fall apart, she said softly. But there's still something good underneath. You just have to look for it, he smiled. Then maybe I get to be the one who finds it. When he walked her to her car that night, he kissed her. It was soft, unhurried, like a promise she didn't know she'd been waiting for. For the first time in years, Emily let herself believe that maybe love didn't always have to hurt. Months passed, and Emily's life began to fill with color again. David was kind, patient, and steady. He made Jonah laugh, brought flowers on random Wednesdays, and always seemed to know when she'd had a hard day. Her friends noticed the change in her, the softer smile, the way she hummed while cooking. For a while, it felt like the beginning of something right. On their 1-year anniversary, David surprised her with a weekend trip to Asheville. They hiked through quiet trails, shared stories under soft rain, and on the last night, over dinner lit by candlelight, he pulled out a small velvet box. Emily, he said, his voice shaking just enough to sound real, you make everything make sense again. Will you marry me? Tears blurred her vision as she nodded. Yes, it felt like a dream, one she didn't want to wake from. The wedding was small, just family, close friends, and a handful of people from David's work. He said most of his relatives were out of state. Not close, he explained. She didn't think twice about it. For months afterward, everything felt perfect. Their mornings began with laughter. Their nights ended with warmth. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, sunlight pouring through the kitchen windows, coffee always brewing, music softly playing in the background. Asterisk, asterisk, but perfection rarely lasts, and sometimes the cracks start in silence. It began one night. Almost a year later, Emily woke to find David's side of the bed empty. She checked the time. To 17 a.m. the house was still. Except for a faint voice coming from the hallway, she got up quietly and followed the sound. David was in the living room, whispering into his phone. His tone was urgent, soft, almost pleading. When he noticed her in the doorway, he froze for a split second, then smiled too quickly. Hey, he said lightly. Sorry, work call. One of the contractors messed up the supply order again at 2 in the morning. She asked. He shrugged, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, deadlines don't sleep. She wanted to believe him. She always wanted to believe him. But that night, when he climbed back into bed, she noticed something new. The faint smell of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his jacket on the chair. At first, she told herself it was nothing, a client, an accident, maybe even a coworker's scent. But doubt, once it finds a way and doesn't leave quietly. In the following weeks, David seemed distant. He left early, came home late. When she asked about his projects, his answers were short, vague. One night at dinner, she tried to sound casual. Emily, you've been working a lot lately. Everything okay? David, yeah, just the usual chaos. Nothing to worry about, he smiled. But it didn't reach his eyes. She nodded, forcing a small laugh. But her stomach tightened. A few days later, while tidying the study, she noticed something strange. An envelope tucked between 2 of David's architecture books. Inside was a photograph. David stood beside a woman Emily didn't recognize. They were close, too close. His arm rested around her waist, both of them smiling at the camera like a couple on vacation. On the back, written in looping handwriting, word for words, always yours, L. Emily's hands shook as she turned the photo over again and again. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. She placed the photo back exactly where she'd found it. She didn't say a word, not yet. That night, she barely spoke at dinner. David didn't notice, or pretended not to. The silence between them grew heavier. The next weekend, Emily met her best friend, Maya, at a small cafe downtown. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Maya, you look pale. What's going on? Emily, I don't know. I think David's hiding something. Emma YA frowned. Like what? Emily hesitated. Late night calls, perfume, and I found a picture. With another woman, Maya leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Maya, have you asked him? Emily, no. I don't want to sound paranoid. I promised myself I wouldn't go through someone's phone again. Emma YA, sometimes not looking doesn't protect you. It just delays the truth. The words stayed with her. That night, when David fell asleep beside her, Emily lay awake staring at the ceiling. Finally, with trembling hands, she picked up his phone from the nightstand. He'd given her the passcode months ago. Back when trust had been easy, the screen unlocked. There were messages, dozens of them, most from a contact named Lynn. Work. At first, they looked professional, project updates, schedules, locations. But as she scrolled, the tone shifted. Lynn, missed you last night. Can't wait till we don't have to hide anymore. Her breath caught. She scrolled faster. Past apologies, past photos, past words that shattered everything she thought was real. And then one final message from just tonight's earlier. Lynn, she'll find out eventually. David, you can't live two lives forever. Emily dropped the phone. Her whole body shook up. Morning came cold and gray. David walked into the kitchen, kissed her cheek, poured his coffee, as if nothing had changed. She didn't move. Emily: who's Lynn? He froze mid-motion, just for a second. But that second was enough. David, she's a client. Emily, then why is she telling you she can't wait until you don't have to hide anymore? The silence that followed was unbearable. Finally, he sighed. Emily, it's complicated. Her voice cracked. No, it's actually very simple. That was the night the world she'd rebuilt began to fall apart again. David moved into the guest room, claiming he needed space. He said things with Lynn had overlapped, but that it was over long before he and Emily married. But lies, once revealed, don't untangle so easily. They stay in every look, every silence, every corner of a shared home. Emily tried to eat, to work, to be strong for Jonah, but her heart felt hollow, her hands cold. The laughter that had once filled their mornings was gone. At night, she stared at the empty half of the bed, the one that used to smell like coffee and aftershave, and wondered how love could disappear so quietly. By the time fall came, everything looked perfect from the outside. The wedding rings, the new house, the Sunday photos, smiles everywhere. But behind the doors of that quiet home in Seattle, something was breaking. The rain fell softly outside as they sat at the dinner table. The sound of silverware echoed in silence. You're quiet tonight, Ella said, glancing at him. Everything okay? Yeah, just work. Long day, Michael replied, eyes fixed on his plate. But it wasn't work. Michael had been distant for weeks, always checking his phone, always somewhere else, and Ella felt it. That strange coldness that comes when love begins to fade. I miss you. You know, she said softly. Even when you're sitting right here. It feels like you're not. He looked up but said nothing. Only the sound of rain filled the space between them. Later that night, Ella walked past the study. The light was still on. She almost didn't look, almost walked away. But something told her to stop, to check. She stepped inside. His phone buzzed on the desk. A message appeared. I miss you too. In that single moment, the world she built began to crumble. Her hands shook as she picked up the phone, scrolling through the messages, long, intimate, filled with laughter and secrets that weren't hers. How could you? She whispered, the words barely leaving her lips. The next morning, the kitchen felt colder. Who is she? Ella asked, standing by the counter. Ella, please, It's not what you think, he stammered. Don't lie to me, she snapped. I saw the messages. The photos, he froze. Not from guilt, but from the weight of what he'd done. Because deep down, he still loved her, but he had already crossed the line. It was a mistake, he said. It didn't mean anything. Then why does it hurt so much? Her voice broke. She turned away. He didn't follow. Days passed. The house felt lifeless, dishes untouched, curtains drawn, the air heavy with silence. Even the dog sensed something was gone. Ella stared out the window, watching the rain trace slow lines down the glass. We were supposed to grow old together, she whispered. She wasn't crying for him. She was mourning the dream that had died too soon. Meanwhile, Michael sat alone in his car, hands trembling. He pressed record on his phone. Ella, I don't deserve forgiveness, he said, his voice breaking. But I need you to know, it wasn't her. It was me. I was lost. I thought I needed something new. But all I ever wanted was you. He sent the message, and waited, but no reply came. Because sometimes, love doesn't die in anger, it just fades quietly the morning she left. There were no arguments, no tears, just silence. She packed her bags slowly, moving through each room as if saying goodbye to ghosts. She paused by the door, looking at the framed photo of the two of them laughing. The day everything still felt whole. Then she placed the frame face down and walked away. Some endings don't need words, just silence. And memory. Months passed. The city changed with the seasons. Leaves burned red, then fell, leaving branches bare against gray skies. Time moved forward. Even when she didn't feel ready to, Ella rented a small apartment downtown. The kind with thin walls and a single window that caught the morning light just right. It wasn't home. Not yet. But it was quiet, and quiet was what she needed. She filled her days with work and long walks through the park. She started painting again, something she hadn't done since college. Her brush moved softly across the canvas, chasing colors she hadn't seen in a while. Peaceful colors, honest ones. Sometimes, though, at night, when the world was still, she thought about him, about the way he used to laugh in the mornings, about the warmth that once felt like forever. Love doesn't disappear overnight. It lingers like perfume, faint but impossible to forget. One evening, as she walked home from the grocery store, she saw him across the street. He looked older, tired. The man who once carried certainty in his smile now carried regret. For a long moment, they just stood there, eyes meeting across the rain. He crossed the street slowly. Ella. Her heart ached hearing her name in his voice again. I never stopped loving you, he said quietly. I know I broke everything, but I've been trying to fix myself. She nodded, eyes glistening. I believe you, she said, but I can't come back. Not because I don't care, but because I finally learned to care about myself. The words trembled, but they were true. For the first time in years, she felt strong. He smiled, a sad, accepting smile, and stepped back. Then I'm happy for you, he said, and just like that, he was gone again. Ella stood there for a while, letting the rain soak her hair. But this time, it didn't feel like sorrow. It felt like release. That night, she lit a candle by the window and watched the flame flicker in the dark. She whispered softly, thank you for the lesson. Because love, even when it breaks you, teaches you something. It teaches you what you deserve, what you can survive, and who you really are when the pieces fall apart. Months later, she finished a painting, a quiet landscape of a sunrise over the ocean. She named it New Light, and when a stranger bought it at a local gallery, she smiled, knowing it was more than paint. It was her healing, captured on canvas. Life didn't end with heartbreak. It began there. And though she would never forget the love that lied, She also knew this, the truth that followed. Her truth was far more beautiful. Sometimes, life gives us love to remind us we can feel again, and loss to remind us we can stand again. Ella's story wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about rediscovering herself after the pieces fell. Because in the end, healing doesn't mean forgetting what broke you. It means learning to grow around it. Stronger, wiser, softer. If this story touched you, if you've ever loved someone who wasn't who they said they were, remember, you're not alone. Your story still matters. Your heart still has more chapters left to write. Thank you for watching When Love Lied. If this true story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. It helps us share more real stories like this with people who need them most. And tell us in the comments, would you have forgiven him or walked away like Ella did?